Okay, well, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this workshop, the precursor workshop. It's a shame, given the circumstances, that there's so much difficulties and that we can't meet in person, but I think it's great to be able to do it online first, and I hope we can all meet in India as soon as possible and everything gets better. So as Prabha said, I will focus on observational prospects for cosmology and the early universe in particular. And of course, the observational prospects are excellent, given already the progress that's been done with experiments in the last decade or so, and what is being planned and what will happen in the next decade or so. So thanks to this progress, our understanding of cosmology has greatly improved. We now have this lambda CDM model that has been established with a wide range of observations with increasing precision. And of course, this model has led to a number of open fundamental questions, such as what's the nature of dark energy, what is dark matter, what is the nature of gravity on very large scales, and of course also what are the question related to the initial conditions and inflation and so on, the early universe, which is the topic of this conference. So how can we know more about the model and its extensions and test these different theories of the early universe and even later? Well, roughly speaking, there's two handles that we have. One is on the background expansion of the universe, and the other one is on the growth of perturbations. And more specifically, in order to be able to get these two types of information or a combination of them, we have a number of cosmological probes, which fall in these broad categories here in this slide. They've been discussed, of course, throughout the conference already. So the primary source of information currently is the cosmic microwave background. There's also the probes that probe the clustering of visible matter, such as galaxy surveys or 21-centimeter surveys or clusters of galaxies. And then there's measurements of gravitational lensing, which allows us to map directly the mass distribution of the universe and therefore the distribution of dark matter. And there are also geometrical probes like supernovae. So I'll be focusing mainly on the large-scale structure probes of clustering, gravitational lensing. I will also talk about the cosmic microwave background, especially how it can be combined to a large-scale structure. And Tarun will, of course, focus a lot more on the CMB in the next talk. So the CMB, as I said, is the primary source of information. We've all seen these maps from the Planck collaboration and the power spectrum of the temperature fluctuation that one can measure. There's a lot of features in the power spectrum. The error bars are now extremely small, so that allows us to derive very strong constraint on the cosmological model. So this is the table from the Planck 18 paper, where we see the constraints on the cosmological parameters on top from the lambda CDM model and some of the extensions. The errors are now very small. They are the order of percent or less. The more relevant one, of course, for the early universe here is the NS, the spectral index, the scalar spectral index, which now has an error of about 0.4% or so. As we move from the left to the right, the collaboration has added more and more information, including other probes, and on the right-hand side, they've included BAO and lensing and other probes as well, which reduces the errors even further. So that's the sort of the current status of the errors on the primordial power spectrum. They've also put constraint on the running and as well on the tensor mode ratio as well, R here, which you can see at the bottom. Now, another set of information comes from galaxy redshift surveys, which are more complicated to analyze because they are in 3 dimensions and also include a lot of nonlinear modes that needs to be taken into account. So what you can see here is a 3-dimensional map of one of the redshift surveys that shows the distribution in 3 dimensions. So the hot, the dark, the red regions are overdense regions, the blue regions are underdense regions. And one can do an analysis like the CMB. We can measure the power spectrum of the galaxy distribution. We can do that at different redshift. What you see in the on the left plot is a measurement from the BOSS survey of the galaxy power spectrum, where you see the features, the broad shape of the power spectrum, and also the barren acoustic oscillation features, which gives another important source of information. One can also do analysis in 2 dimensions and measure both in the radial and transverse modes. You can see on the right-hand side. That gives further information, in particular about the velocity field through redshift space distortions. Okay? So there's quite a lot of information to extract from these galaxy surveys. However, the interpretation of these galaxy surveys rely on a fundamental assumption between the relation between visible matter and the underlying density perturbations, which are the perturbations that are predicted from ab initio models of structure formation. And a complementary and very interesting probe is gravitational lensing, which allows us to get information independent of this relation between visible matter and mass. And the principle of it is illustrated in this diagram. So basically the idea is that we have background galaxies whose images are being distorted by the presence of foreground distributions. It turns out that the distortion can be related directly to the distribution of mass in the foreground distribution, which we call a lens. And therefore we have an effect that we call gravitational lensing, where the lensing is done by gravity itself. And by measuring the shape of very large number of galaxies, then one can reconstruct the mass distribution in the foreground. And this is now being done with increasing precision and increasing area. So what you see here is a mass map derived from the dark energy survey, which is one of the ongoing state-of-the-art survey for weak lensing and large-scale structure in general. So they also have a supernova component as well. So this is a map derived from the first year release, which covered 1,500 square degrees of the sky. Again, the red regions correspond to overdensities, and the blue regions correspond to underdensities. And this is correspond to projected mass along the line of sight in this region of the sky. Now one can do a statistical analysis again using of this map using 2-point function statistic, like is done the CMB, and as well on for the galaxies, as I showed you just before, the galaxy surveys. And this can be done by splitting the galaxies into different redshift bins. So what you see on the lower right-hand corner is this so-called tomographic analysis. So the redshift distribution of each of these 4 bins. Photometric redshifts are used to separate the galaxies into these different redshift bins. And then one can measure the 2-point function in each of the bins, but one can also measure the cross correlation between different bins given additional information. So what you see on the left-hand side is a kind of a busy plot, but that shows all the different power spectra that can be measured. So on the sort of closer diagonal, you see the auto power spectrum for each of the bins, and then off diagonal, you see the cross correlation between the different bins. And using all this signal, one can then fit a cosmological model, including corrections for nonlinear effects on small scales, and from that derive cosmological information. So this is the one of the results from the dark energy survey collaboration. So what you see on the left-hand plot is a constraint on omega matter and sigma 8, the amplitude of matter fluctuations on 8 megaparsec scales, as more and more information is used. So in green, it's only the weak lensing which is used. And then in blue, one includes not only the weak lensing, but also the galaxy clustering itself, where the galaxies are derived from the same imaging survey, which is used for the weak lensing, for the same dark energy survey, Y1 data. And as you see, when you go from the green to the blue, in other words, when you add galaxy clustering to lensing and also the cross correlation between galaxy clustering and lensing, one gains even more precision, one gets improved constraint on sigma 8 omega matter. Sometimes it's convenient to, instead of looking at this sigma 8 parameter, look at this S8 parameter, which is showed in the on the left-hand side in the upper plot. And S8 is a combination of sigma 8 and omega matter that kind of flattens the contours and makes them kind of horizontal. And it's often convenient to consider it. So now if you look at the right-hand side, you'll see a comparison between these DES Y1 constraint from lensing plus large-scale structure and galaxy clustering. In blue, you see the DES Y1 constraints from before, and then in green, you see the Planck constraints. At the time, I think it was Planck 15. And you see that there's this somewhat of a tension, not very significant, but nevertheless present between the Planck constraints and the dark energy survey constraint. This is often called the sigma 8 tension between the early universe and then the lower redshift universe. Now, since then, there's been a measurement by another collaboration called the KIDS collaboration. So they've published just recently an analysis of their next new data release, which now includes 1,000 square degrees. And in one of their papers, they combine the weak lensing analysis with also a cross-correlation and autocorrelation with a redshift survey, which is the BOSS survey. Also, they include the 2DF lens redshift survey as well. So once again, this is a combination of weak lensing and clustering and the cross-correlation. So in this case, for the weak lensing, they've used, as you see in the plot on the right-hand side, upper right-hand side, 5 redshift bins shown in different colors, which shows the redshift distribution of the galaxies in each of the bins. And what you see on the upper left-hand side is all the power spectra of these, for the weak lensing, of the auto and cross power correlations of all these different bins. Again, it's quite a busy plot, but the point is that there's quite a lot of information to use, which gives basically 3-dimensional information or tomographic information. So not only as a function of angle, but also as a function of discretized redshift or radial distance. And then on the lower left-hand side plot, you see the 2-point function for the galaxy redshift surveys. And you see this being done in 2 bins, at low redshift and high redshift. You see different modes in parallel and transverse modes that can be measured for each of these bins. And then on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, you see the cross-correlation power spectra between the galaxies seen in the redshift surveys and the weak lensing shapes of the distorted galaxy shapes, which act as a background. So the way to think about it is that the galaxies, the luminous galaxies in the redshift survey act as a tracer of the lenses, of the mass distribution producing the lenses, and then the background galaxies are used to measure, the shape of the background galaxies are used to measure the weak lensing signal. So again, just a lot of 2-point function here you can see in this analysis that can be combined together to constrain the model. And what they find is on this plot, again, quite a busy plot, but I want to emphasize a few points. So the first is the constraint on this S8 and omega m that you see on the right-hand side. So that are in the inset of the right-hand plot. What you see is what happens when they add more and more information. So the pink, for example, is weak lensing alone, and the red contours, which you see are much smaller, corresponds to the constraints when they had the clustering as well and the cross correlation. And you see that the contours become quite small. They compare to the Planck contour. Maybe you can look at the right-hand side already. So the red is this analysis from KIDS plus BOSS plus 2DF lens. And then you see the green contours, which are the Planck 18 constraints. And you see, once again, you see this tension between Planck and KIDS and the KIDS analysis. They quantify the constraint to be about, the tension to be about 3 to 2 sigma, depending how you quantify it. And then you can also compare to the DES Y1 result I was showing you before, which are shown in yellow here, which are consistent with the KIDS result with the slightly larger errors in the sort of upper right, left direction as well. Okay, so that's the tension. Now you can also notice, going more specifically to the early universe, you can see the constraint of NS. If we go back to the left-hand side, now these constraints are still quite broad due to the limited area of the surveys, and they're quite limited, in fact, by even the priors on NS. But this is going to improve soon, and this is thanks to the large number of surveys which are ongoing and then which are being planned, which would improve enormously on these measurements. So they're shown here on this table for the visible near infrared, like DES and KIDS. There's more data, in particular DES, which is being analyzed now. Eventually, DES will cover 5,000 square degrees, so there'll be quite an improvement in the precision. There are other surveys like SST, Euclid, WFIRST, Subaru, which will provide even larger area, higher image quality, lower systematics. And then there's also a number of spectroscopic surveys, which are ongoing. For example, DESI is already taking its first data, and all of these can be analyzed. There's also will be, of course, improvement in the CMB measurements. We'll hear from Tarun soon about the Bharat experiment, for example, and the other experiments which are planned. And there's also some very exciting development happening in the radio with 21 centimeter experiments. There's quite a large number of experiments which are ongoing and being planned, like CHIME, HIRAX, BINGO, and so on, GMRT, all the way to the SKA experiment, which will provide sort of the last generation or fully high generation radio survey. Here, using the technique is to use 21 centimeter emission to probe neutral hydrogen in the universe. And one of the advantages of this technique is that it will allow us to go to very high redshift, bridging the gap between the visible near-infrared survey and the cosmic surveys and the cosmic microwave background measurements. Now, with these kind of surveys, we'll be able to improve the precision dramatically. So here is a study we did some time ago, led by Adam Amara, where we did some forecasts. There's been quite a lot of work on forecasts. It's just to show you this one, where you see the precision one can get in different parameters as a function of, as we use more and more data. So you can maybe focus on the stage 4 horizontal line, where you see the errors on dark energy parameters, but also on NS, for example. This is with stage 4, so like LSST or Euclid, covering a very large region of the sky out to high depth. And you see that the precision that can be obtained, let's say on NS, is about 0.6% or so, which is not very far from the Planck CMB constraint that we have on NS. On other parameters, like dark energy, which was one of the main drivers for these experiments, then the constraints are very strong. But generally, the thing to keep in mind is that the large-scale structure surveys will eventually get on their own precisions comparable to the CMB. And of course, if you combine the CMB and the large-scale structure surveys, which is shown on the stage 4 plus Planck line, for example, then you get even higher precision and, of course, a lot of check on systematics. So this will give us very strong constraints on all the parameters, including the primordial parameter, like the early universe parameter, like NS, its running, and the non-Gaussian, primordial non-Gaussianity. Now, in order to tap all this information, one needs to be able to use different strategies. The more one place where we can get even higher precision is by combining the different probes in a more integrated way. And by that, I mean, we can use not only all the probes together, like the CMB and the large-scale structure, but also all the cross-correlations. This is something we call the integrated probes. This is something started by Andrina Nicola, DTH, and now there's a new student, Raphael Sgier, who's done a forecast, which I can show you to illustrate this. So let's consider combining the CMB and large-scale structure, weak lensing, and also CMB lensing. So you see on the left-hand side simulated maps that Raphael produced for all these different probes. And then on the right-hand side, you can consider all the two-point functions which can be derived from these maps. So on the diagonal, you see the auto power spectra of these different maps. So you could, for example, one would be the CMB power spectrum, one would be the lensing power spectrum, weak lensing power spectrum, what would be the galaxy cross-correlation power spectrum. In this analysis, Raphael only considered one of the components of the CMB fluctuation called the integrated Sachs-Wolf effect, and not the primordial CMB fluctuations in this particular analysis. That's why you don't have the wiggles in the CMB power spectrum. And then again, moving off the diagonal, you see all the cross-correlations. Now, one of the questions is how much do we gain if we integrate all these probes early on and take into account all the cross correlations. And this is shown in this diagram. So he took into account a large covariance matrix between all the probes and different scales. What you see on the diagram on the diagonal on the right hand side is a constraint on the different parameters that he considered. In this case, a lambda CDM parameters. But one can also consider the joint constraints on the parameters that you see either on the upper right hand side or lower right hand side. Now, if you focus on the upper right hand side, what you see is the gain that we get from using only the auto power spectrum. So this would correspond to treating each of the probes separately and combine them at the end, okay, in the likelihood analysis. And that is shown in blue. And then in brown, it's what happens when you include the cross power spectra, which then takes into account the information and the correlations between all the different probes taken together. And you see that the gain in this case, one also includes nuisance systematic parameters, is quite large. So for example, if you look at the NS omega B panel, for example, you see that the gain when we include the cross power spectra is quite large. So one way to gaining even more information with all these future surveys, which will cover large areas of the sky and therefore will have larger overlapping regions, is to do this combined probes at early stages by looking at the cross correlation. There'll be quite a lot of gain there. Another way to gain in these constraints is by going beyond the 2-point function, okay? So in these forecasts that I've shown, and that's done often done, is we look at a, let's say like a weak lensing map, we consider a 2-point function, and then we derive the cosmological constraint from it, or we forecast from it. Now, there's of course more information than just 2-point function in these maps, because these maps have a lot of non-Gaussian features coming from either late time nonlinear evolution of the structures on small scales, or even primordial non-Gaussianity, which will also provide some non-Gaussian signals. Now, one can design some higher order statistics or peak statistics or endpoint functions to characterize this, the non-Gaussianity. However, there's a very interesting approach which has been developed recently based on machine learning, where instead of having a human design statistics or a set of statistics, one uses machine learning to characterize the statistical properties of a map using training from a large number of simulations where we explore a large range of cosmological parameters. So we train the machine learning algorithm, and then we give it a new map, let's say a new data, and we ask the algorithm to derive constraints on cosmological parameters. Now, this requires a lot of forward modeling and simulation, so it's quite heavy. But once you do that, there's a hope that one can capture more non-Gaussian information, or at least some non-Gaussian information. So this has been done for the first time by a PhD student, Yannis Fleury and others at ETH, and I'm showing you the result here. This is done on the Kids 450 survey, which is the precursor to the Kids 1000 survey I was showing you the results of a bit earlier. And if you focus, for example, on the right-hand side, you see that the blue is the result from this machine learning algorithm. And this is constrained on the sigma 8 omega plane I was showing you before. And then the red would correspond to the Kids 450 analysis, which uses only the 2-point function. And you see that there's a gain. The machine learning has managed to capture information beyond the 2-point function. So it's managed to capture non-Gaussian information and therefore give us even stronger constraints on the parameters. Now, this we did only with 2 lambda CDM parameters, but that we're in the process of extending it to a larger number. And that can be also expanded to early universe parameters as well. Another way to gain precision beyond these 2 techniques I was telling you about, which is to combine the probes with more information, or to look at non-Gaussian information in the data, is to go to to smaller and smaller scales, or higher K, or higher L. The problem when we do this is that the astrophysical systematics become more and more important, in particularly the the corrections from the baryonic effects become more and more important, or our imperfect knowledge of galaxy clustering or neutral hydrogen clustering. However, I think there's some good prospects for this. What is shown on the right-hand side is analysis done by Hamza Padmanabhan recently where we looked at how the constraint, the forecast for the precision on cosmological parameters is degraded if we include astrophysical systematics. So this is for radio surveys, in this case, for example, the SKA. So you can ask, okay, if I think I know everything about the astrophysics of neutral hydrogen, what would be my constraint of cosmological parameter with SKA mid, for example? And this would be the red vertical bars that you see on the right-hand plot. However, if we now leave 3 parameters for the astrophysical parameters, and this is based on a halo model for neutral hydrogen that was developed by Hamza, then you see the blue line, which is a degradation, at least for some of the parameters in the precision. However, if we now add the current knowledge of the neutral hydrogen coming from current data, then you go back to the yellow vertical bars, which are not so far from the red one. So that means that even with the current knowledge on from the data on neutral hydrogen that we have now, coming from observation in absorption and emission, coming from 21 centimeter and then Lambda and alpha observations, then we can basically recover most of the promised cosmological information from these surveys. They have so much information in them that they can basically constrain both the cosmology and the residual uncertainties on the astrophysics, at least for the neutral hydrogen H1 experiments, which is very promising. So to conclude, the current and planned surveys will lead a significant improvement in precision on cosmological parameters, including the early universe parameters. There's upcoming measurements from DS, DESI, and other experiments which will improve the precisions in the next few months. DS, for example, is planning a year 3 release very soon. In order to gain even more precision, we will wait to the next generation, the stage 4 experiment like LSST, Euclid, and so on, and of course the next generation of CMB experiments. And to reach all this precision and control systematics, one can use a number of strategies. We can look at the cross correlations between the probes, which is very promising and anyway required to take into account the dependent nature of the two of the different probes. In order to get to higher precision, one can also increase the number of modes used and go to high K. For that, one needs models for the baryons, which are constantly improving either through semiotic model techniques or numerical simulations. And to capture non-Gaussianity, machine learning, I think, is a very interesting possibility to capture as much non-Gaussianity as possible in these very complex data sets. So thank you very much for your attention.